So Rahel, what do you think was the kind of 2 points to this question, but what do you think the hardest shift in perspective for you was? I think you touched on it, but in terms of like purpose and meaning of life, and what has been the most life-giving thing about Christianity for you?
The hardest was coming from a karma-based faith, which is a lot of doing, working, proving yourself, which, by the way, you can still end up doing as a Christian. Right? So you can have a sort of Hindu-like God with a Christian name in that sense. And so, and then coming out and then receiving revelation that you're loved as you are, and God's loving you, and I don't need you to prove, I don't need you to justify. That was really tough. And also, I think on that note, I think one good thing about Hindu culture is community, and the way community is done. Transitioning out of South Asian community in the West and into non-South Asian community in the West, that was difficult in the sense that community is not the same in that sense. So, you know, I would say those were the 2 tough things. And like I said earlier, that took a good 2-3 years to sink into my heart that I'm loved, you know. And there was one point, I think in 2015, because then I loved going to church and I loved the worship, I loved sermons, so I was involved in this prayer group, I was involved in that prayer group. And one point I still remember where it was. I was walking to church and it wasn't audible, but I sensed God say, "Why are you hiding?" You know, and I didn't go to church. I just went back and I just sat with God for a while, and what He unpacked for me in that quiet time was that you're hiding behind all these things, even church things. Can you just sit with me? I'm also just enough. I can be more than enough, you know. So I had to catch myself also trying to prove myself through these small things, you know, and getting busy, you know. I mean, look, busyness is good, I think, as long as it's in line with what the Father is saying. But that was another struggle for me, was to not busy myself, you know. So one sense of busyness came from obviously my previous faith, because that's what it was all about. We never had a concept of a Sabbath. You know, you rest when you're asleep. You're always on call. So, but then the other busyness I found was, I think it was a way to hide pain. It was a way to hide rejection, so I was using Christian things to get on with, to hide pain, rejection, abandonment, and those kind of things. So then even pulling back from that, those Christian things, and spending more time with the Lord alone, that initial transition was really tough. You know, not that you don't get involved in ministry, you don't, you know, obviously if God's saying, but I was hiding behind that, you know, to bury pain and to, you know, just not think about my past or the people I'd lost. Like my elder brother's a monk as well, and he doesn't speak to me now for 10 years. It's been 10 years. So that was tough. The most life-giving was in 2012, in October. This is 1 month after I got baptized. I was quite gloomy because I didn't have a job now. Right? As a monk, you were paid. You weren't paid, but everything was looked after in a huge way, in a very comfortable way. I didn't have a job, didn't know where I was going to live. I had no money. So my small group friend, I was just sitting in his office and I was just dashing out CVs. You know, I mean, what kind of CV is that? You know, what job do you get being a monk for 20 years? Just desperate. Anyway. And then he said, look, go and get some worship. There's worship going on at church. And I went to the worship, and initially there was some prayer time, but there were 4 or 5 people there. And this church setting had a slight charismatic leaning on. I don't call it charismatic, I just call it, if Jesus comes, he comes. And the lady leading the prayer said, just move around a little so the Spirit can move, just lighten up a bit. I thought, yeah, well, I'm not going to do that. And I just stood there, Anyway, she came over and laid a hand on my shoulder and started praying. And the tangible Spirit of God just came on me with this incredible joy, And I thought, wow, this is what all the philosophers that I had read for 20 years, this is what they were pursuing. When you read their meditations, when you read their practices, what they wanted through karma, I just standing here gloomy, and I got it through grace, that incredible joy from the Lord. And so after that encounter, I often wonder why Christians say, look, it's not all about feelings. I think I know what they mean, but peace looks like something. He's the Prince of Peace. In his presence, there's fullness of joy. So if you sit with him, you do receive that. If you don't want to call it an emotion, it's fine, but, So God said to me, look, steward this every day. Don't compromise it. Not religiously or through routine, but I think that's been life-giving for me. That's healed a lot emotionally and some physically, but incredibly life-giving that has been to me is the presence of God.